Oklahoma is the land of second chances. Who were the people that made it so? We'll dig for the golden threads they've woven through Oklahoma history. The Red River Institute is proud to present Oklahoma Gold. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert, along with award-winning author and Southern Nazarene University historian John J. Dwyer. We'll find the golden nuggets of Oklahoma history here now. Oklahoma Gold. Race to the moon. John J. Dwyer, what is this story?
Gwin, a generation ago, those that have been around that long well remember the Cold War. That was a better than half-century long, very tense and dangerous contest that involved wars, such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War. There were plenty of times when the Cold War was very hot, but it involved what was termed the First World, that is America and our Western democratic allies, Western Europe and Canada and Australia and so forth, against the Second World, which was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Soviet Union of Russia, Communist Russia, in a day when this great totalitarian, atheistic, that's right, illegal to believe in God or practice faith or worship Him, based in Moscow, Russia, were contending for the communist control of the world. For us, it was influence to help people stay free. The Third World, of course, was what we at the time called underdeveloped countries, the countries that were behind on technology and so forth. We talk about this because the race for the moon occurred within the context of this historically pivotal Cold War. What was the race for the moon? Well, coming out of World War II, where the United States and Soviet Union, the great leaders of the free and tyrannical communist worlds, respectively, had combined. It took both of us and many other countries to defeat Hitler's Germany and Tojo's Japan. We had been allied, but very quickly after the guns went silent in World War II, the Soviets, the Soviet Communist Russians, quickly, because they had lost perhaps 27 million people in World War II to the Germans, they were, paranoid is not a strong enough word, to never be encroached upon again, as both Hitler and Napoleon had done in previous generations. So they gobbled up the eastern half of Europe. They mobilized and weaponized China and took it from a backwater giant to the military power that it still is today in communist country. And the Russians went on the move. I think the modus operandi was the best defense against further encroachment and invasion as a good offense to take over the world for communism. And make no mistake, that's what they were about doing. So the United States was way ahead technologically. We had the atom bomb first. We were way ahead in our society, our living standard. But unfortunately, the communists, as they still are, the communist Chinese, were very good at stealing our technology and our inventions and the things that our great, brilliant minds in a free society were able to come up with. So they came up with their own atomic bomb, which they never could have done on their own. China went communist, which they never could have done on their own if not for spies and traitors within our own ranks and the British and others. And then in 1957, the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, stunned the world with the launch of Sputnik. That was the first artificial satellite ever to orbit Earth. Might be a surprise to most of us today that we did not have that first satellite. It was our enemies, the Soviet Russians.
We were number two.
And we were number two. And I hate to say, Gwin, but a distant number two, because 4 years later, 1961, the Soviets continued on their hot streak, and they launched the first manned spaceship that circled the globe, Yuri Gagarin. And a movie that I would highly recommend to our listeners, if you haven't seen it, it was Oscar nominated just not too long ago, 3 or 4 years ago, called Hidden Figures.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah, great movie, ostensibly about three overlooked, hidden, forgotten African-American women who played a crucial role in America in this race for the moon. But it also told in an epic fashion the bigger picture. I mean, JFK, astronaut John Glenn, and others, the big picture of why this was so important, this race for the moon, because, well, in fact, I'll get to it here, the kind of the pivotal point as America was behind and really humiliated by the Soviets, who were using this to sell communism to the many countries in the world that were wavering whether to go free or to come under the communist domain, thinking that it might be better for their people. They would get a lot of support and a lot of military protection from the Soviets. None other than John F. Kennedy, President John Kennedy, in the year 1962. Now, JFK, folks may not realize, himself was a decorated naval hero and war hero in World War II. He'd nearly been killed when the patrol boat that he was commanding was cut in two in the middle of the Pacific in a battle by a Japanese destroyer. He personally saved most of the crew from that ship. This was not by his saying or his daddy's. This is what the crew themselves wrote. So he himself, he was a war hero, but he knew the horrors of war. Unlike anyone that hasn't been to war, he knew those horrors, and he was all about steering clear of war, but having a peace through strength. And he knew the importance of America winning this peaceful war in space with the Russians to show that our way of life was superior. So in 1962, right after the Russians had just really, danced a victory dance on our 50-yard line, if you will, in our own house by getting the first astronaut into space, which, again, part of the danger of this, Gwin, was if you had satellites orbiting, manned spaceships, who's to say that you couldn't not only look at your opponent's, your enemy's backyard, but launch nuclear weapons, which both Russia and America had in abundance by then, without being able to be defended from outer space. So JFK comes before over 40,000 people in Rice Stadium in Houston, and he calls the nation to stand in this race and the importance. And he says, I'm quoting JFK now, "For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond, and we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding." And then JFK concluded, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energy and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." End quote. And when we come back, you'll see how Oklahomans helped win that race.
John J. Dwyer is stitching the past to the present with the golden thread, the golden nugget. What will that be on Oklahoma Gold? We're racing to the moon on Oklahoma Gold. John J. Dwyer, here are the clues. The Cold War. John F. Kennedy, the president, issues a challenge, and you think you know what he's going to say about the race to the moon. The golden nugget?
Well, indeed, the race to the moon was a key battlefront, if you will, figuratively speaking, in the Cold War between Soviet Russia and its atheistic, communist, Marxist empire and the United States leading the nations of the free world. And we're talking 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even up into the 70s. We talked before the break about how President John F. Kennedy issued a clarion call to America when we had fallen gravely behind the Soviets in the space race, to where there was a fear that here the Soviets are putting the first unmanned satellites into orbit. Then they're putting the first manned spacecraft orbiting the Earth. They've got nuclear weapons by the thousands. The national security, it became an issue literally of national security, and JFK challenged the nation to step up. Well, we're going to talk about three of the people that were prime leaders in doing that, as America decided to not just participate and come in second, but pass the communist empire and win the race to the moon, which, as we know, we did on June 20th, 1969, the day I believe that Dwight Eisenhower died, and John F. Kennedy poignantly had died, of course, years before, and never saw the victory that he initiated for America. But I want to talk about Weatherford's own Thomas P. Stafford, whose own mother arrived in a covered wagon at Weatherford, Oklahoma Territory before statehood, and a generation later, her own son would fly 4 crucial outer space manned missions for the United States of America. Isn't that amazing? In one generation of people, mom arrives in a covered wagon, son winds up after winning all the awards at Weatherford High School, in the Naval Academy and beyond. And he flies both Gemini 6 in 1965 and Gemini 9A, which he commanded in 1966, which pioneered the manned rendezvousing of separate vehicles, one spacecraft with another. His third mission, Apollo 10, which he also commanded, was nothing less than a dress rehearsal of the fabled moon landing that soon followed. It occurred just 2 months later. And the mission that Stafford led on Apollo 10 executed virtually every facet of the moon landing except for the actual landing. Stafford and his crew even had a lunar module descent that came within 10 miles of the moon. And then his final mission, Apollo-Soyuz, which may have actually been his most famous, years later in 1975, that was a joint project as the thawing was first beginning between America and the Soviets. And Stafford docked his spacecraft with the Soviet spacecraft. They opened their hatches and met on international TV and shook hands. And you can see that legendary picture in our article on the race to the moon on our website, johnjdwyer.com. A worldwide TV audience witnessed the famous handshake. Well, no talk of race to the moon and Oklahomans would be complete without Gordon Cooper. If you've seen the movie The Right Stuff that came from Thomas Wolfe's novel, you remember Dennis Quaid playing this swashbuckling air aviator race. And Gordon Cooper flew the longest Mercury mission. That was the first set of missions right before the Apollo set. And he flew the last one of those. And it was called Faith 7. Which he named because he wanted to make it a testament to his compadres, to his country, and also to his God. And that was Faith 7. Gordon Cooper led many other famous missions as well. But I want to, before we run out of time here, talk about the greatest astronaut you'd never heard of. That's Jerry Mock Cobb, Jerrie, Oklahoma City class and graduate, who was actually accepted into a small group of female astronaut program because of her award-winning aviation feats. And then sadly, again, a different time, an earlier time, when the government decided to ditch the female astronauts. This was in the 1960s. Otherwise, she, rather than a Russian cosmonaut, female, Valentina Tereshkova, might have been the first female in history. And that Russian cosmonaut mocked Jerry Cobb's faith when she wrote about it in Reader's Digest. Jerry Cobb responded, if I didn't believe in God, there's no way I would have the confidence to fly in space. And talk about God closing a door and opening a window. She flew for the next 48 years pioneering food drops, medicine drops, everything else in the Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforest, helping people through her missionary aviation efforts in a way perhaps even more important than it could have been to be the first female astronaut in space.
And where was she from?
She was from Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City. So we have Oklahoma City, Shawnee, and Weatherford. Now
That's right.
Oklahoma Gold.